My mom cried last night. The entire table went silent. June looked down slowly. A 4-year-old girl in a red hoodie stood inches from the most dangerous hand in the room. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't looking around the restaurant the way children do when they wander somewhere they shouldn't. She was standing completely still, her small chin lifted, her dark eyes fixed on the man at the corner booth, like she had walked in with a purpose older than her years. In her hand was a folded piece of paper, creased in 3 places, the kind of crease you only get when someone has folded and unfolded something many times over. She held it out to him with both hands. Jun Seo-han did not move. The men seated around him, 4 of them, large and quiet in the way that dangerous men are always quiet in public, had all stopped mid-sentence. Glasses of water sat untouched. Someone's fork was frozen halfway to a plate. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the low clatter of a Saturday afternoon bistro, seemed to recede like a tide pulling back before something large arrives. Jun looked at the paper, then he looked at the girl. She did not blink. He had sat at that corner booth for 11 years. He had received envelopes, phones, photographs, and once a single bullet placed on a folded napkin by a man who hadn't lived to eat dessert that evening. He had been handed bad news and good news, and news that required him to remain perfectly still while his insides rearranged themselves. He had trained his face into a mask so practiced it had become his actual face. But a 4-year-old girl in a red hoodie, holding a piece of paper with both hands, Dee had just done something none of those things had managed to do. She had made him pause. "What is this?" he said. His voice was low, unhurried, the voice of someone who had never once needed to raise it to be heard. "It's a list," she said. "I made it for you." One of his men, the one closest to the aisle, a broad-shouldered man named Choi, who had once broken 3 of a rival's ribs without leaving his chair, shifted slightly. Jun raised 2 fingers off the table without looking at him. Choi settled back. Jun reached out and took the paper. He unfolded it carefully. Inside, in alternating black and red crayon, was a list. The handwriting was a child's, wobbly and large, but the information was not. 11 rows. Each row had a date, Ida written out in full in careful block letters, the way a child copies something they've been taught to write precisely. Next to each date was a number. At the bottom, underlined twice in red, was a total, $5,400. Jun read it once, then he read it again. "Who taught you to write this?" he asked. "I watched Mama write it, then I copied it, but I made it prettier," she said, entirely without irony. "I put the dates in black and the numbers in red so it's easier to see." Jun set the paper down on the table in front of him and folded his hands on top of it. "What's your name?" "Roya." "How old are you, Roya?" She held up 4 fingers, and then, after a small thought, curled one back down. 4.5, she said. The half was clearly important to her. "And where is your mother?" For the first time, something shifted in the girl's expression. Not fear. Something closer to the feeling you get when you've been holding something heavy for a long time and you finally set it down, and your arms don't quite know what to do with themselves. "She's in the kitchen," Roya said quietly. "She's always in the kitchen." Jun looked up then, not at the girl, but past her, past the center of the dining room, where a few tables were occupied by weekend lunch customers who had pointedly returned to their meals. Past the service counter, toward the kitchen pass-through window where, just barely visible through the narrow rectangle of glass, a woman was moving. Quickly, head down, the way someone moves when they are afraid that stopping, even for a moment, will cost them something they cannot afford. She was thin in the way that comes from forgetting to eat rather than choosing not to. Her hair was tied back in a knot that had started the day neat and was now pulling apart at the edges. She wore a plain white uniform shirt with the restaurant's name on the chest, Harlow's Bistro, and she moved through the kitchen with the mechanical efficiency of someone running on the last of their fuel, but not yet willing to acknowledge it. Jun watched her for 4 seconds, which, for him, was a long time. Then he looked back at Roya. "Go back to your seat," he said gently. "I'll take care of it." Roya studied him with those steady dark eyes for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then she gave a single nod, the way a person nods when they've made a decision and are at peace with it. She turned and walked back across the restaurant, climbed onto the padded bench seat at a small table by the window, and picked up a coloring book as though nothing had happened. Jun Seo-han looked down at the paper in front of him. 11 weeks, $5,400. And the name at the top of the list, written in black crayon in a child's careful hand, Harlow's Bistro. Owner, Mr. Sterling Cross. He picked up his water glass and took a slow sip. Across the room, at a table near the entrance that had been conspicuously set with a bottle of champagne and a spread of food that no one was eating, Sterling Cross was talking loudly on his phone. He was a heavy-set man in his late 40s with a particular brand of confidence that comes from never once having faced a consequence he couldn't talk his way out of. He was wearing a new watch. June had noticed it the moment Cross walked in, a piece that ran somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 if June was calibrating correctly, and he always calibrated correctly. New watch, champagne, 11 weeks of unpaid wages. June set his glass down. He didn't say anything to his men. He simply turned the piece of crayon-written paper over, reached into his jacket pocket for a pen, and began writing a name on the back of it. Then he folded it again and held it out to Choi without looking. Find out everything, he said quietly. Business accounts, debts, licenses, suppliers, all of it. I want it by tonight. Choi took the paper and left without a word. The rest of the meal continued in silence, the way all of June's meals did. He ate slowly, watched the room, and did not once look in Sterling Cross's direction again. But he watched the kitchen pass through window. And every time the woman appeared in it, moving fast, head down, hands full, he noted it the way he noted everything, quietly, completely, and permanently. If you've ever watched someone carry a weight that should have broken them and carry it anyway, you understand what Jun Seo-han was looking at. And if you've ever had a reason to understand that kind of weight personally, then you already know why he didn't look away. Before we go further, if this story is already pulling you in, you're exactly where it wants you. Stay close. The next part changes everything. June left Harlow's Bistro at 2:47 in the afternoon. He did not leave a review, did not complain about the service, did not speak to the owner. He left a tip that was precisely 20% of the bill, and he folded under the edge of his water glass, and he walked out into the gray November afternoon with his coat buttoned to the collar. He came back the following Tuesday, alone, sat at the counter with a newspaper and a coffee, and read the same page for 40 minutes without turning it. What he was actually doing was watching. He watched Sterling Cross arrive 40 minutes late, smell faintly of last night's alcohol, and immediately begin berating the morning prep cook for a misaligned stack of chairs. He watched a delivery driver come and go, noticed that Sterling signed for the delivery without checking a single item against the invoice, and filed that away. He watched two of the waitstaff exchange a look, the particular look of people who communicate in a private language built from shared suffering. And he watched Simone. That was her name. He had learned that from Choi's initial report, which had come through at 11 the previous night, cleanly organized and thorough. Simone Adara, 31 years old, single mother, no family in the city, had been working at Harlow's Bistro for 8 months as a line cook, technically, though the job had expanded quietly and without compensation to include prep, cleaning, inventory management, and increasingly, whatever Sterling Cross didn't feel like dealing with that day. She had complained once, formally in writing, through the city labor board. The complaint had been filed 6 weeks ago and was still listed as under review. June had read the file 3 times. He had not changed expression once, but somewhere in the carefully engineered stillness of his face, something had tightened around the eyes, and only someone who knew him very well would have seen it. Choi knew him very well. He had mentioned it to no one. On the Tuesday visit, June watched Simone navigate a lunch rush with one fewer staff member than she needed because Sterling had fired a dishwasher that morning over a cracked plate. He watched her step in, cover the gap, and keep the kitchen running with the barely visible strain of someone who has learned that if they stop, everything stops, and they cannot afford for everything to stop. She had a daughter who put red crayon numbers on a list. She had a daughter who walked up to strangers and said, "My mom cried last night," because somewhere in that 4-year-old mind, she had understood that her mother would never say it for herself. June left at 1:15, and he sat in the back of his car for a moment before telling his driver to go. He said nothing for the entire ride. That evening, in his office on the 14th floor of a building that officially belonged to a property management company, Jun Seo-han sat behind a desk that held only 3 things: a lamp, a glass of water, and the full file on Sterling Aldous Cross. It was not a flattering document. Sterling Cross had inherited Harlow's Bistro from his uncle 9 years ago. In those 9 years, he had managed to burn through 2/3 of the original operating capital, accrue debts with 3 different suppliers, settle 1 sexual harassment lawsuit out of court, and develop a gambling habit that had made him briefly interesting to 2 separate loan operations before he became more trouble than he was worth to either. The new watch had been purchased 11 days ago. June noted the date. It was the same week the wage logs on Roya's list showed the last payment Simone had received. He closed the file. Then he opened it again and read the last page one more time. There was a section at the bottom, a single paragraph that Choi had flagged with a small asterisk and a question mark. June read it again now. It concerned a cash deposit made to Sterling's personal account 8 months ago, a significant sum, irregularly sourced, that had arrived exactly 3 weeks before Simone Adara had been hired. June leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Choi. "The deposit," he said. "Find me the source." "Already working on it," Choi said. "But sir, there's something else." June waited. The woman. Simone Adara. A pause. "She's been on a list. Has been for 7 years." The room did not change. The lamp still burned the same warm yellow. The water glass was still half full. June's hands were still folded in the same position on top of the closed file. But something shifted. Something invisible and seismic. "Whose list?" June said. It was not a question. "The Halverson Network. They flagged her years ago. Apparently there was an incident. She witnessed something she shouldn't have. They've had a passive watch on her ever since. Nothing active. But if anyone goes digging into her, they'll get notified." Jun was quiet for 5 seconds. "And does Sterling Cross know this?" Another pause. Longer this time. "We think that's why she was hired," Choi said carefully. "We think Cross was paid to keep her in one place. Controlled, underpaid, too exhausted to move." The lamp burned. The water sat still. "Come in," June said. "Tonight." He hung up the phone. Here is what none of the lunch customers at Harlow's Bistro knew, and what Simone Adara herself had never fully understood. 7 years ago, on a rainy Wednesday night in late October, a man had been crouched in an alley off Carver Street with a wound in his side that was more serious than he had initially told himself it was. He had been there for 40 minutes. He had been telling himself for 39 of those minutes that he was fine. He was not fine. It had been Simone, 24 years old, coming off a double shift at a diner 3 blocks away, umbrella broken, shoes soaked, taking the alley as a shortcut because the rain had turned the main street into a river, who had found him. But she hadn't screamed. She hadn't run. She had looked at him with those steady dark eyes, taken in the situation with a quiet assessment that surprised him even then, and said, "Can you walk if I help you?" He had said yes, which was not entirely accurate. She had helped him anyway. She had taken him to the emergency entrance of St. Crispin's Hospital 4 blocks away, had waited long enough to confirm he was being seen, and then had disappeared before he could ask her name. He had been too weak and too careful to push, but he had memorized her face. And years later, through careful and quiet inquiry, he had found her name. And when he found it on a passive surveillance list belonging to the Halverson Network, he had done the only thing he could do without drawing attention to either of them. He had started paying protection. For 8 years of protection money, paid through 3 layers of intermediaries to ensure that the Halverson Network's passive watch remained passive. that no one would ever find it worth their time to do anything more than check a box on a list and move on. 8 years. And she had never known. He had never planned for it to be more than that. A debt settled in the only currency he knew. Silent, clean, permanent. But now Sterling Cross had turned her invisible cage into a financial trap, and the Halverson deposit had changed the architecture of everything. And a 4-year-old girl in a red hoodie had put numbers in crayon on a piece of paper and walked it across a restaurant like she had been carrying it all her life, which, in a sense, she had. Take a second and think. Have you ever had someone quietly protect you without you knowing? Drop it in the comments, because what comes next is going to hit different. Jun Seo Han arrived at Harlow's Bistro on a Thursday at 11:45 in the morning. He arrived with Choi and with a third man named Park, who was quiet and thin and carried a leather document folio the way a surgeon carries a case, with the calm precision of someone who understands exactly what the instruments inside are for. He sat at the corner booth. He ordered coffee and eggs. He ate at a measured pace. Sterling Cross arrived at 12:10, not late enough to be deliberate, not early enough to suggest investment. He moved through the restaurant with the posture of a man who believes his presence is itself a contribution, nodding at tables, making a show of checking something on his phone. He smelled of cologne applied too recently to a shirt worn too many times. He did not notice Jun at first. That was fine. Jun had not yet needed him too. What happened next took 40 minutes, and from the outside, it looked like very little. The restaurant hummed and turned over its lunch crowd. The kitchen sent out plates. Sterling Cross settled at a table near the bar with a man Jun recognized from the file, a supplier he was 3 months behind with, and proceeded to loudly promise a resolution he clearly had no plan to provide. And Jun watched the kitchen. At 12:42, Simone Adara came through the swinging kitchen door carrying a bus tray with both hands. She was moving quickly, the way she always moved, head down, purpose forward. She hadn't taken a break yet. She'd been on shift since 7. She was passing Jun's table when her foot caught the edge of a chair someone had pushed out unevenly, and she stumbled. Not badly. She recovered in a single step, didn't drop the tray, but the stumble took her directly past Jun's booth, close enough that for 1 second she was standing less than a foot from his table. She didn't look at him. She rebalanced and kept walking. But Jun had seen her face in that second. She was exhausted in the specific way that goes beyond tired, past the point where sleep would fix it, the kind of exhaustion that lives behind the eyes and changes the way a person holds their jaw. He had seen it before. He recognized it the way you recognize weather coming. He let her pass. Then he picked up his coffee cup, held it for a moment, and set it back down. Get cross, he said quietly. Choi rose from the adjacent table and walked over to Sterling Cross's conversation. He didn't interrupt it. He simply stood at a proximity that made the supplier visibly uncomfortable until Sterling, with a show of exasperation, excused himself. He came to the booth without knowing what he was walking into. This was, Jun had found, always the most efficient way to begin. "Mr. Cross," Jun said pleasantly, "please sit down." Sterling Cross looked at Jun, then at Choi standing behind him, then at Park with the leather folio, and then back at Jun. The calculation was visible on his face, even as he tried to hide it, trying to place Jun somewhere in the social geography of the city, unable to land on anything that made sense, and defaulting to the confidence of a man who had never, in his own experience, encountered a situation he hadn't eventually wiggled out of. He sat down. He even smiled. "Don't think we've met," Sterling said. "You a food critic? Because I know the service has been a little—" "I'm not a food critic," Jun said. "Investor? Because I'll be honest, the timing is interesting. We've been looking at some exciting expansion." "I'm not an investor." Sterling's smile tightened at the edges. "Then what can I do for you?" Jun nodded to Park, who opened the folio and placed a single document on the table, face up. He slid it to the center with 2 fingers and then folded his hands and became very still. Sterling looked at the document. He looked at it for a long time. It was a financial summary. Clean, precise, organized by category. Unpaid supplier invoices, outstanding employee wages. 3 months of late payroll tax filings, 2 business license violations, one of them an unresolved inspection failure from 8 months ago that should have triggered an automatic review, but somehow hadn't made it to the top of anyone's pile. Sterling Cross's face did not change in any one dramatic moment. It changed the way ice thins, gradually, invisibly, until you're standing on something that can no longer hold you. "Where did you get—" "The gambling debts are not in that document," June said conversationally. "I left those out. We don't need them for this conversation." Sterling Cross said nothing. "But they exist," June said, "and they are held by people who are not as patient as I am." A long pause. "What do you want?" Sterling said. His voice had changed. The performance of confidence was still there, barely, or like a jacket he was holding onto with one hand while the wind pulled at it. "I want several things," June said, "but let's start with Simone Adara." Whatever Sterling had expected, that wasn't it. Something moved across his face, quick, involuntary, gone in under a second. But June caught it. He always caught it. And that was the first twist, because June had walked into Harlow's bistro, expecting to find a man who was simply greedy and careless. What he found instead was a man who flinched at a name. Not in the way a guilty person flinches when confronted with an accusation. In the way a person flinches when a variable they thought was under control becomes suddenly, visibly out of control. Sterling Cross hadn't just been withholding Simone's wages because he was broke. He had been withholding them because he needed her to stay. Not out of sentiment, out of instruction. Jun placed both hands flat on the table. "Tell me about the deposit," he said softly. The restaurant continued around them. Plates arrived at other tables. Glasses were refilled. Somewhere in the kitchen, something sizzled on a pan. Sterling Cross looked at the document for a long moment. Then he looked at June. And then, in a move that June had not anticipated, and which recalibrated everything in the room, Sterling Cross laughed. It was a short, dry sound with no warmth in it, the sound of a man who has just realized the size of what he's standing in the middle of. "You don't know who you're dealing with," Sterling said, but his voice was quiet now. The bravado was gone. What remained underneath it was something far less comfortable to look at, genuine fear. "The people who paid me," Sterling said slowly, leaning in, "are not people who—" "The Halverson Network," June said. Sterling's mouth stopped. The booth went very quiet. "I've been managing that particular situation for 8 years, June said, his voice no louder than it had been throughout the entire conversation. "I'm aware of their interest. I'm also aware that their interest is now operating through you, and you have made it visible, which they will not appreciate any more than I do." Sterling was staring at him. He started. "I'm someone who would like this to end quietly," June said, "for everyone involved, including you, but that requires your cooperation." Another pause, longer. Outside, a car horn sounded once on the street. A child at a nearby table knocked a spoon off the edge and reached to catch it without looking. Sterling Cross made the only decision available to him. "What do I have to do?" What followed was not dramatic in the way movies make these things dramatic. There were no raised voices, no threats spelled out in plain language. Park produced a second document, and then a third, and Sterling Cross read them with the slow, heavy attention of a man reading the terms of a surrender, which is exactly what they were. The wages owed to Simone Adara, totaling $5,400, were to be paid in full by the end of the business day. The outstanding amount was already prepared. Park produced an envelope and placed it beside the document without comment. The restaurant itself, its license, its equipment, its lease, was to be transferred via a legal instrument that Park had also, with quiet efficiency, already prepared. Sterling would sign. The building's owner, who held the original lease and who Jun had spoken with 2 nights ago in a conversation that had been brief and unambiguous, had already countersigned. Sterling would receive enough to clear his gambling debts and disappear to somewhere the Halverson Network's accountants would not bother looking. This was not generosity. It was economics. A clean exit cost less than a messy one. Sterling Cross signed 3 documents. His hand was steady, which Jun respected even now. When it was done, Sterling stood up, buttoned his jacket, and looked at Jun with an expression that was almost curious. "She's just a cook," he said, not cruelly, with something closer to genuine bewilderment. "Why does she matter this much to you?" Jun picked up his coffee cup. "Because she helped someone who was down," he said, "and didn't ask for anything in return." Sterling Cross left Harlow's Bistro through the front door at 1:47 in the afternoon, got into a car that was not his usual one, and did not come back. And now, the second twist. Because Jun had solved the immediate problem, the wages, the ownership, the exit, but the Halverson Network's passive surveillance on Simone didn't disappear the moment Sterling signed a paper. The mechanism that had kept it passive was Jun's protection arrangement, the invisible financial buffer that had held them at arm's length for 8 years. But that arrangement had been contingent on Simone remaining invisible. The moment Roya had walked across a restaurant and handed a piece of paper to someone like Jun, Simone had become slightly less invisible. And if the Halverson Network ran a routine check and found that their embedded asset, Sterling Cross, had suddenly exited the picture, they would eventually notice the disturbance. Eventually was an unpredictable timeline. It could mean weeks. It could mean days. Jun sat in the booth alone for a few minutes after Sterling left, his coffee gone cold in the cup, working through the geometry of it with the specific part of his mind that he kept reserved for problems with moving parts. Then he made a second phone call. This one was longer. This one required him to speak in a way he rarely spoke, which was directly, without the usual architecture of implication and patience. But he called in a debt that had existed for 4 years, one he had been holding in reserve for something significant and had not spent until now. By the time he was done, the Halverson Network's passive watch file on Simone Adara would be quietly reclassified as inactive, not erased. Erasing things made noise. Simply reclassified, moved to the back of the archive, given a status flag that meant periodic review at 6-month intervals, which was as close to forgetting as these systems ever came. It cost him something significant. He did not think about that cost for more than a moment. He thought about a woman in the rain. He thought about the question she had asked without hesitation. "Can you walk if I help you?" He put his phone in his pocket and called Choi. "Bring her in," he said. Gently. The conversation between Junseo Han and Simone Adara took place in the small office behind the Harlow's Bistro kitchen, a room that smelled of old invoices and cooking oil, with a desk that no one had organized in years and a single overhead light that made everyone in it look slightly tired. Simone came in with her arms folded across her chest. She was still in her work clothes. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at Jun with the expression of a person trying to categorize something their brain hasn't filed yet. "Mr. Cross is gone," she said. It wasn't a question. Something in the shift of the restaurant in the last hour had told her. "Yes," Jun said. She looked at Choi, standing to one side, then at Park, who had reorganized the desk and was now seated quietly in the corner. Then back at Jun. "Chio, you're not from the labor board," she said. "No. Are you going to tell me who you are?" Jun considered this honestly. "I'm going to tell you what's relevant," he said, "which is this. The restaurant is now in new hands, yours if you want it." Simone looked at him without moving. Something in her face was working very hard to remain neutral. "That's not how ownership transfers. The paperwork is done. The leaseholder has agreed. There are some formalities, but they will be handled." He gestured toward Park, who produced the transfer documents and set them on the desk in front of her. Simone looked at the papers. She did not touch them. "Why?" she said. And there it was, the question underneath all the other questions. Not how or when or what does this cost, just why? The Jun reached into his jacket pocket and placed an envelope on the desk. "This is your pay. 11 weeks is calculated. It's all there." She still hadn't touched anything. "Simone," he said, and something changed slightly in his voice when he used her name. Not softness exactly, something more precise than that. You've been working in a building that was designed to keep you from leaving. The person who structured it that way is gone. You are not in debt to anyone. You have not done anything wrong, and you are allowed to take what is being returned to you." The overhead light buzzed faintly. Simone Adara looked at the documents on the desk. Then she looked at the envelope. Then she looked up at June with those steady dark eyes. And for a second, just a second, the composure cracked, not into tears, but into something that lives just behind them. The face of someone who has been holding so much for so long that the simple act of being permitted to set it down feels like a kind of vertigo. She sat down in the chair in front of the desk. She picked up the envelope. "My daughter," she said quietly. "She came to you." "She did," June said. Something crossed Simone's face, pride and pain in the same expression, the look of a mother who has tried very hard to shield her child from the reality of their circumstances and just discovered that the child had seen all of it and had found, in her own 4-year-old way, a way to act on it. "She's 4, Simone said, half to June, half to herself. 4.5, June said. Simone almost smiled. It was brief and complicated, but it was there. She signed the documents. June produced a key. Made on a single key on a plain metal ring. No fob, no label. He held it out. "What's this?" Simone said. "Front door key," he said. She took it. He rose from the desk, buttoned his jacket, and paused at the doorway. "There's a card in the envelope," he said. "One number on it. If you need anything, anything structural, anything that puts the operation of this place at risk, that number will reach someone who can help." He didn't say it would reach him, but the pause before someone was notable. Simone held the key in her palm. She looked at it. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. Jun Seohan looked at her for a moment. "You already did," he said. "A long time ago." He left before she could ask what that meant. Now, here is the last thing, and it is the thing that redefines all the others. 3 weeks later, on a cold Tuesday morning with the first frost of December tracing white lines along the restaurant windows, Simone opened the door to what had now been formally, legally, and in every practical sense, renamed Royale's Place. She had picked the name without hesitation. Roya was asleep in the back room on a folded blanket and 2 seat cushions, her red hoodie pulled up to her chin, a coloring book open and abandoned beside her. She had spent the previous evening helping her mother rearrange the salt and pepper shakers on every table into a pattern that she found aesthetically superior, and had fallen asleep mid-task with a sense of profound satisfaction. The morning rush was small. The neighborhood was still adjusting to the change in ownership, but by 10 o'clock, 3 tables were occupied and a 4th was pulling in from the street. And Simone was moving through the kitchen with the same speed and focus she always had, but with something different in it now. Not the mechanical grind of someone running on obligation, something warmer, something that was choosing to be there. Meanwhile, in the back of a car moving through a different part of the city, Jun Seo-han sat across from his lieutenant, a calm and sharp-eyed woman named Kim Da-hee, who had been with him for 6 years and who understood, better than most, the specific grammar of his silences. She had been reviewing the recent restructured ledgers, the protection arrangement, the Halverson reclassification, the Harlow's transfer, with the precise attention of someone who manages the infrastructure of things other people never think about. "The payment history," she said carefully, by not looking up from the ledger. "For the block." "Yes," June said. 8 years. "Yes." A pause. Kim Da-hee was not a person who paused without reason. "The total paid out," she said. "Over 8 years, factoring in the original arrangement and the annual escalation. It's significant." "I'm aware," June said. "You paid more in a year than that restaurant makes in a year." "I know." Kim set the ledger on the seat beside her. She looked at him with the even, unsurprised expression of someone who has learned that being unsurprised is the most useful thing she can offer him. "She's just someone you met once," Kim said. "Yes." "Someone who helped you?" "Yes. And for that you've been paying She didn't ask, June said. Kim stopped. She didn't ask for anything, he said. She saw someone who needed help. She helped them. And then she walked away in the rain. He was quiet for a moment. I've been in this business for a long time, Dahi. I've dealt with people who help you and then keep the receipt forever. People who help and want to be thanked forever. People who help because they want something in return. He paused again. She just helped. Kim Dahi looked out the window. That's worth protecting, she said. That's everything worth protecting, June said. The car moved through the city. And here, at last, is the truth that reframes everything that came before it. The protection payment was not guilt. It was not obligation. It was not the mechanical settlement of a ledger that Jun Seo-han kept in the currency of debts and credits. It was something that Jun would never name out loud. Yeah, because he had spent so many years operating in a world where naming things made them vulnerable, and he had protected this particular thing with the same quiet totality with which he had protected her. He believed, in the part of himself that the work had not fully reached, that the world contained a finite and fragile amount of genuine goodness, the kind that doesn't calculate, the kind that doesn't wait for the right moment, the kind that crouches in the rain beside a stranger and says, "Can you walk if I help you?" and means it entirely. He believed it was worth the cost of protecting that goodness from everything that the rest of the world would do to it if it ever went unguarded. He had guarded it for 8 years. He had never planned to collect. But a 4-year-old girl in a red hoodie had walked up to his table with a list written in crayon, and in doing so had inadvertently told him something he hadn't fully known until that moment, that the goodness had survived, that it hadn't been worn down by 8 months of deliberate exhaustion and withheld wages, that it was still there, still intact, still raising a daughter who faced the most dangerous hand in the room without flinching. The tree, he thought, does not fall easily when the roots go deep. He looked out the car window. On a block in the western part of the city, a small restaurant was opening for its second week of business under new ownership. The sign was hand-painted, not professional, done by a woman and a 4.5-year-old girl working together on a Sunday afternoon with 2 different sizes of brush. It read, in letters that were level in some places and gently uneven in others, Royale's Place. Inside, Roya had woken up. She had put on her red hoodie. She had climbed up onto a counter stool and was watching her mother work with the specific, devoted attention of a child who has decided that watching someone you love is a serious and worthwhile occupation. Every few minutes, Simone would glance over from the pass-through and find those dark eyes on her. Every time she would make a face, something small and private just for the two of them, and Roya would respond with a grin that was still losing teeth. The morning light came in low through the front windows, the December kind that's all angle and no warmth, but still manages to make everything it touches look like it's worth something. The front door key hung on a hook by the kitchen entry. The card with 1 number on it was pinned to the edge of the prep board, where Simone could see it from any angle of the kitchen. She hadn't used it yet. She didn't need to yet. But knowing it was there was the thing. Knowing that the invisible walls that had held her in place were gone. Knowing that the exhaustion she had been living inside, that particular brand of trapped and sinking exhaustion that is so much heavier than ordinary tired, had a floor now. That she could fall to a certain point and there would be something solid there. She had cried the night Sterling left, privately in the office with the door closed. The kind of crying that doesn't have a specific object, not grief, not relief exactly, but the release of something that had been pressurized for so long that it needed to go somewhere. Then she had washed her face, gone back to the kitchen, and finished the closing shift. Because that's who she was. And because that was, as it turned out, exactly the kind of person worth an 8-year vigil. Jun Seo-han did not return to Royale's Place after that Thursday. He would not return for 6 months, and when he did, it would be as an ordinary customer, unannounced at a busy lunch hour. He would sit at a table in the middle of the room, not the corner, and he would order whatever was good that day, and he would eat it slowly, and he would leave a tip that was generous without being conspicuous. Roya would be there. She would be, by then, 5 years old. He self-importantly engaged in refilling napkin dispensers with the solemn focus of someone with a position of responsibility. She would see him when he was leaving. She would wave, he would nod, and in the 5 years after that, and the 5 years after that, Royale's place would become precisely the kind of place that neighborhoods build their identity around, without quite knowing how it happened. The food would be the thing people mentioned first, because Simone's cooking was genuinely extraordinary, not in a technique-driven restaurant critic way, but in the way that matters more, which is that eating it made people feel settled, like something had been correctly arranged. Roya would grow into the kind of person her first 5 years had always been pointing toward. Watchful, steady, disarmingly direct. The kind of person who walks into a room and quietly takes in everything in it before she speaks, who sees past what people are performing and into what they actually mean, who helps without announcement and moves on without waiting to be thanked. She would not know, for a long time, the full architecture of what had surrounded her childhood. She would not know about the protection payments, or the Halverson network, or the signed documents in a leather folio, or the phone call that had cost Jun Seo-han a 4-year debt. But she would know, in the wordless way that children know the fundamental shape of things, that they had been held, that the world had not been entirely indifferent to them, that somewhere in the machinery of difficult things, something had chosen to turn in their direction, and she would, in her own way and in her own time, do the same for someone else. Because that is the only way these things survive, not through power, not through money or fear or the careful management of leverage, but through the unremarkable, irreplaceable act of a person in a rainy alley looking at a stranger and choosing to help, and then a daughter, inheriting that choice without being told, and then a world, which is always secretly waiting for exactly that kind of person, quietly making room. If this story stayed with you, the mother, the little girl, the silent guardian, let me know in the comments what hit you hardest. Stories like this one exist because real people carry real weight in silence every day. And sometimes the only way to honor that is to tell it. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't. And come back, because the next story is already on its way.